Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, the Charlotte Post Foundation, Black Lives Matter Charlotte. I'd like to introduce with us this evening, we have the President, Gerald Johnson, Robert Johnson, Program Chair, Anthony Chadwick, Technical Director, and Tiffany Capers, Moderator. My name is Linda Johnson. I will be the host along with Nichelle Spears. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'd like to invite Gerald Johnson, President of the Charlotte Post Foundation. You could take it from here. Unmute yourself, Mr. Gerald. Just a moment.
Now we're ready to go.
Yes.
Whoop, whoop. Thank you all for attending this event this evening. Before we get started, I wanted to spend a little time talking about what the foundation is about so that when you start putting in the big dollars for the donations that we're going to ask you for, you'll know what you're paying for. The big deal here is that we are a 3C educational programming foundation where we do a lot of work in this market. The 3C stand for first, the correctional education program. It's an after-school program where the program is transportable, but right now we're in Walter G. Byers Elementary School. And this program takes children that are performing below grade level and boosts them up to reach reading proficiency where they can actually start catching up from a grade level perspective. And we've had 38% students in a year's time usually will reach proficiency. All the students will grow, but only 38% of them, and we're trying to get that to 45% this year, even with COVID, will actually reach proficiency. We have a continuing education program that we call the Top Senior Program, where we get all of the high-performing African-American seniors in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system to apply to be a top senior. And those that apply, we end up celebrating their achievements. We have a big dinner for them all at the end of the school year, where their families are invited to celebrate with us and them. And with that program, we end up with a panel of judges that will take those applications and pick 2 seniors that will receive scholarships from us. And those dollars can be spent any way those seniors want to spend it, rather than directly going to the scholarship. We heard a lot about students who say, we get scholarships, but a lot of the money can't be spent the way we want to spend it, like for books, computers, et cetera. We give them the money and tell them, have at it. And they're very responsible students, and so it works. And finally is our community education program, Black Lives Matter. Woo! That scares a lot of people when we say that, because everybody gets scared, but we did that on purpose for the woos and what the boos coming out with it. But it gets people's attention, and we can talk about the program in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with it. And the big thing is we have convening sessions. We bring people together, start talking about issues that are negatively impacting people of color at a disproportionate rate than everyone else. And we have discussions around that, because if we don't talk about it, we can't be about it. And so we're very serious about having these convening sessions to talk about those issues. And primarily we focus on healthcare, education, crime, and upward mobility. And so those are the things that we're doing as a foundation. And before I continue, I'm going to bring on one of my favorite people of all time, Natalie Brown from Ally Bank. Ally is our sponsor of this event, and I want her to say a few words. Well, since she's a sponsor, she can say as many as she likes, but come on, Natalie, give us a word or two.
Well, thank you, Gerald. I'm also honored to serve on the board of directors for the Post Foundation, and to be with you for the last couple of years as we've been moving the needle with literacy and education. And I'm excited about this conversation today, so I won't say a lot, but I'm happy to be here and happy to support such an important conversation that we need to have today, and an important program that we have around the Black Lives Matter educational series. So I'll just say on behalf of Ally, we're happy to be here. Excited to support the Post Foundation and the work that you do. At Ally, we believe in helping people achieve their financial dreams and supporting efforts to increase their economic mobility. We're here as a company to champion the community, champion the work that organizations like the Post Foundation is doing. And as a part of that commitment, diversity and inclusion is also top of mind for us. And so as a company, we strive to make sure that all backgrounds are respected and appreciated from our top down, bottom up at our company. And it's essential to our culture at Ally. And I say that as a woman of color, after 7 companies, it's probably the best company I've ever worked for. And we believe in that truly wholeheartedly. And we're doing a lot of work in the community to demonstrate that and making sure that we're serving our customers, our stakeholders, and our employees the right way. So the work that the Post is doing, strengthening the community, providing the needs to the community, educational needs, conversations like this to help the community move forward is something we are proud to be a part of. And so thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here with you this evening. And for that, I'll turn it back over to you, Gerald.
Thank you, Natalie. We appreciate all you do for the community and us as well. Let me just say a couple of things. We're going to put a donation link in the chat. We're going to sneakily but cleverly drop it in on occasion so that you can see that and you can start donating, and don't hold back. We'll take anything you want to give us. But I want to thank the committee for the work that they do in putting on this program. I want to thank Reverend Boswell for coming on and presenting tonight. I want to thank all of you for attending, and we're going to move forward. And I'm going to bring up one of the people that was responsible for starting this particular initiative that we're doing, is Tiffany Capers. And so Tiffany, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gerald. Thank you again, Natalie, for the support that Ally is providing to the Charlotte Post Foundation so that we can have these kinds of conversations and work towards the impact we're having in schools and with children. As we have all been experiencing this year and last year, life is really different and it's impacting all of us differently. And life won't ever be the same after 2020. So we all are continuing to make the investments that we need so that we can live into our fullest potential. I am going to share a few slides with you all this evening to continue the conversation. And I think, Linda, you've given me the ability to share my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, Stephanie, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. So what I've included as a way to ground us in this conversation, and this is what we would normally do if we were together, would be to provide some introductory slides, some commentary around why this particular conversation matters. James Baldwin is one of my favorite writers, novelists, essayists, poet. And so what you're seeing on the screen are just some of his words. And it's really very eerie and maybe a little bit sad that what he had to say decades ago still rings very, very, very true today. So we included him in many of our conversations in the past, and I'm bringing him into this conversation today because his words help to, again, shape and frame what it is we're hoping to accomplish. His writings, his questions, his perspectives are as poignant as ever. And obviously in honor and tribute of Black History Month, bringing in those who were before is a good way for us to start with where we are today, so we can also think about where we want to go in the future. We create this space for this conversation and to explore this question. We encourage this inquiry around what it means to be white. And that question has not been without some controversy in and of itself. We've had people who've asked us, why do you all want to know what white people think? why do you all care why white people are thinking about being white? But it is that juxtaposition of the degree to which white people understand their whiteness that they quite honestly can appreciate my Blackness. And until we get to that point, I don't know that we will be able to move forward. So as others have mentioned, we're very honored to have Reverend Dr. Boswell with us this evening to have this conversation. He has been at this for a minute. This most recent foray into these conversations isn't new. He's been having these kinds of conversations since 2017. There's an article in The Observer. He was talking about what he was doing at Myers Park Baptist Church then. And there's just one line that I picked up in that article where he said, we started the problem. So part of why I am interested in knowing what white people think is because in knowing what they think and understanding how they view our problem helps us, I think, get to better solutions. Always bring in the names of these three women because they launched Black Lives Matter, the national movement. And it was a call to consciousness about Black people and a call to action for Black people. When we yell, decry, declare, speak, utter the words Black Lives Matter Charlotte, this to us as Black people, but it's also to others who are in positions of power and influence and control to own the responsibility to make life better and just for us all. Local initiative started in 2014 by the Charlotte Post Foundation, and we've been trying to focus on issues that affect Charlotte, and we've been having these kinds of conversations now going on 7 years. We think about change at multiple levels, at the individual level, at the community level, and at the systemic level. All three of these levers have to be manipulated, maneuvered, pressed, pushed in order for change to happen. It's not just one aspect, it's all of it, and it has to happen simultaneously. We aspire to create spaces and places where we provide information, create space and opportunity for discussion, inspire people to make choices, to make a decision, and ultimately choose to act. And we focus on change at and across all of these sectors: health, education, economic mobility, and crime and justice. So again, these gatherings, if we were together, would be to create a brave space, to attract a diverse audience, and to embrace discomfort. We do not promise that somebody's feelings will not get hurt during this conversation, but we also know that that's how muscle grows. It grows when you tear it. We have to experience some degree of discomfort in order to grow. So not seeing ourselves clearly is both the problem and the solution. We are committed to engaging in conversation where we can be windows and mirrors. So what does it mean to be white? Reverend Dr. Benjamin Boswell. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And I'll get started with a quick question. People have been hearing a lot of talk, and so we'll get into the meat of the conversation. Apologize, that went very quickly, didn't it? Not there yet. So I first knew that I was Black when a little white girl snipped me and told me that I did not smell as rank as the other N-word. That happened when I was 8 years old, and that has stuck with me for decades. When did you know, I apologize, my laptop is doing its own thing. When did you know that you were white, and when did you sort of begin this journey?
Thank you, Tiffany, and thanks to Gerald and the entire Charlotte Post Foundation for this tremendous honor to be with you tonight. When did I realize that I was white? That is a phenomenally important question, and it did not happen for me when I was young, as it does for other folks who are racialized differently than I am, because of whiteness being the dominant cultural ideology in our culture today. I did not really understand what it meant to be white until I was much older. And even then, I would have to say that, to be quite honest, I'm still trying to figure it out. The last 10 years has been a journey for me that has taken me to a deeper place in learning and trying to discover my whiteness and what it means to be white, and also trying to work with others, particularly in the faith context, to try to discover what it means to be white. I think now, looking back, I was being formed to be white, formed to be white by my parents and my culture as a child in ways that I did not understand. In fact, I was being formed to be white in ways that I thought was simply what it meant to be an American, or simply what it meant to be a Christian. And therefore, for me now, whiteness has been so entangled with my nationality, my theology, my religion, my faith, my identity, that beginning to try to disentangle and understand whiteness is to disentangle it from every other aspect of my identity. So in the last 10 years, it's been like an existential crisis to realize that my entire identity is founded around, or has been, as many other folks who are racialized as white, or as Baldwin says, think they are white, has been founded around a lie, a mythology, an ideology that is really, when you boil it down, in my understanding now, is really anti-Blackness at the core of it. And trying to discover what I can be as a person who's been racialized as white. You know, there are those who would say we need to be anti-racist, become anti-racist. And I think that's true, but I think there's even further places to go for people who are racialized as white toward abolition of the things that whiteness uses to maintain its system of domination and control and power over the lives of Black and brown and indigenous people. So I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to discover it. And I will say that your story reminds me of my daughter, who has been a part of my journey. She learned that she was Black very early on because she's in an adopted family, but she had a very similar story to the one that you told. She was playing in the neighborhood with some friends, some of whom were white, and a little white boy, called her the N-word. And turns out that his mother was a police officer. And so the conversation with him and with his mother and with her at that age was a startling moment, obviously for me and for our family, but an important learning moment as I learned secondhand from her experience what life is like for some in the world, and how different it is for my life, for instance.
You made an interesting comment, and it's one that I've been thinking of lately. There was a story on NPR recently where an author wrote a book about the three mothers: Malcolm X's mom, Martin Luther King's mom, and James Baldwin's mom. And there was a snippet on the radio where white people were surprised that Black children called their moms mommy, as if we would call our moms something else. But there is this overwhelming, very persistent notion and idea that somehow Black people are subhuman, not human. And then, as you've indicated, also not American. And staying in that place then allows white people to justify the actions they have taken historically and the actions they take very contemporarily against Black people. But what has this conversation been like within your congregation? What has that journey been like for you and for them?
Well, yeah, that question you're asking reminds me of another Baldwin quote, and we're gonna have to enjoy our mutual love of Baldwin tonight, Tiffany, because Baldwin has saved my life in so many ways and has become my teacher, who I constantly return to. Baldwin says that in an article about white people, he says, white people had to try to figure out what to do with the fact that they were Christian and had slaves. And so they couldn't justify that on Christian grounds. So the only way to do that was to dehumanize the slave. And so they create this category of dehumanization. Of course, I'll say, just in my learning about my own whiteness, what happened when we did that is we ended up dehumanizing ourselves in the process. And so whiteness becomes this double-edged sword of dehumanization. Through the process of dehumanizing people who are Black and brown, white people are also dehumanizing themselves, losing touch with their humanity, losing sight of their humanity. All of this, of course, centered around this conception of this question of Christianity, which is why it's white Christianity, as W.E.B. Du Bois has said, has been a miserable failure. I agree with that comment. As a white pastor, it's been a miserable failure. And we saw the consequences of, 400 years of white religion on the steps of the United States Capitol on January 6th. Chickens come home to roost, as Malcolm X would say. And so I think it's been an eye-opening, earth-shattering experience for me and for our congregation to try to look at whiteness as a part of to do the work of trying to understand our whiteness as a part of becoming anti-racist. I think Baldwin says white people are trapped in a history they don't understand. And until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. And so we're trying to do that work of understanding the history that we're trapped in, which we're often in denial of as white people.
So before I ask another question, we did have a question from someone in the audience. Mary wanted to know, what was the conversation with the little boy's mother? The little boy who...
Well, we went face to face to her home and asked her, where, first of all, we just said that this is inappropriate language. You can't, your son can't possibly use these words. And we asked, of course, the mother was like, I don't know where he learned that. I don't know where he heard that. I can't believe he used that. Which, for me, I was like, of course he learned it from someone in this household. He's only 7 years old. Where would he have heard that before? So I wasn't convinced, but we just said that that's completely inappropriate. Can't happen again, ever.
Got it. And so this notion of whiteness and white exceptionalism and white supremacy culture being dominant, how are you reckoning with that, like in your day-to-day living? I know you're having the conversations with your congregation, and you mentioned your daughter. Like, what does that look like for you as a white man trying to reckon with his whiteness? And I say that because I believe that most white people don't think about white. They don't think about their whiteness when they're interfacing with the world. I never stop thinking about being Black. No matter degree of education, no matter job title, where I work, where I live, I am always a Black woman. And I am Black first and woman second, because I don't think I get any passes because I happen to be female in a lot of instances. So I'm just curious about, what does that look like for you on a Tuesday at Harris Teeter when you're thinking about your whiteness?
Yeah, I'm at the intersection of all the privilege, right? So white, male, cis, heterosexual, man, upper middle class. So I'm at the intersection of all the privileges, and I have to understand that and what that means and the advantages that society affords me unjustly for that position. Of course, that is the architecture of whiteness, is to create a hierarchy in which all other people fall somewhere on a hierarchy, and people who look like me at the top of that hierarchy and everyone else down. That is, of course, the lie, the system of power and domination that's created. And so I have to reckon with that and take responsibility for that fact in my life as a pastor, as a father, as just a citizen going to Harris Teeter, as you said. And it's for me, I see it as a responsibility to be at the work of dismantling white supremacy everywhere I see it. That's why I started the program that we've been doing at my church and also in some other places. But it's also when people come out of that program, we ask the question, now that you've come to understand a deeper understanding of your own whiteness, what would you do in your own sphere of power and influence? And some people don't, white people, like you said, don't ever talk about being white, but they also sometimes don't talk about power because they have it and they don't have to talk about it. So it's startling, first of all, just for white people to even talk about whiteness. I remember Gerald and I were having that conversation when we were thinking about this dialogue. He said, Black people talk about being Black all the time. And I said that, white people very rarely ever sit around at a dinner party and say, what's it like for you being white right now? That's just almost because it's unmarked. And it's partly because power is more powerful when it's invisible. And it's also just the greatest form of privilege to avoid having to talk about race, right? It must be nice not to have to talk about race, to be able to have a different conversation and to have the time and space to ignore it or pretend it's not happening because you're a part of the dominant culture. So I think creating space in the white dominant churches where we are constantly talking about whiteness already feels radical to many. And trying to figure out what it means to participate in the movement for Black Lives and for Black Lives Matter is also challenging in the white dominant context as well.
Speak more to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a great article that came out about how Myers Park, there was a march in Myers Park led by Cass Otley and many other activists and organizers and leaders. And then many people in that same neighborhood, and that a lot of people participated from Myers Park in that march, and a lot of people in my church participated in that march. And then many of those residents ended up voting for Donald Trump in the election. So what was that about? What happened between June and—
Yes, what? What happened?
What happened between June and November? Well, whiteness really was there. I mean, it was almost like there was this sort of, people don't want to admit, right, how they really feel. And come out and hold a sign that says Black Lives Matter is one thing, right, in the movement, as to show some kind of solidarity, maybe because they were even afraid. So they put the sign up. But then to turn around and vote, I think they voted for their economic interests. I mean, think about the neighborhood that Myers Park is in, very wealthy neighborhood. And, Donald Trump's tax plan, I'm sure, benefited many of the people who live in that neighborhood greatly. And so, when it comes down to it, part of whiteness is this economic side as well that we don't often want to talk about. We have to hold class and race closely together because part of what whiteness does is it steals and creates policy that is theft, right, and hurts Black lives. And so I think we have to hold together the racial and the economic together. And in that case, folks voted for their economic interests at the polls. Of course, there are a lot of poor white folks who are voting against their economic interests out of solidarity with their white rich folks. Somehow they feel that they're more connected to white rich folks than they are to their poor neighbors. But so it's a confusing thing right now how whiteness works in different places.
And I think Isabel Wilkinson explores that in her book Caste, in terms of white people who might not be economically advantaged, but they are siding with their whiteness because whether they recognize it consciously or not, and some of them probably do, that is an advantage. So they will choose being white, if you will, versus being anything else, because that is what is a means of social, economic, political currency. And so why not claim it? And that's if it was just you and me, Reverend, just sitting somewhere talking, I would say, yeah, I don't get white folks. I don't understand how you can hold those two ideals in constant. I had a conversation with a gentleman who happens to be from the Myers Park area, happens to be a Christian, does a lot of good work in the community. And I said, I know your faith, I know your values. How do you do both? And he essentially said what you said, that Donald Trump is good economically. Not even good for him personally, because he was a person of wealth, but just overall, just appreciated his economic position. We have a few questions in the chat that I will try to get to as well. But something else you mentioned in your comment, there's another James Baldwin quote that talks about it's easier for people to cry than to change. So this performative allyship is another variable that I think we saw, frankly, a lot during the course of the summer. The murder of George Floyd was a moment of intense heat. Do you think it was a moment of light, intense light? Do you think it was actually a moment of change or just a moment of shift?
Oh, I don't know if I could answer that right now. I do know there was an intense increase in the passion among many white folks to do some work on that. But the question is, will it be long lasting? And will it be deep systemic change, radical change? I think, for instance, the question around something as obvious to me as the question of restorative justice and reparations if that seems still so radical to so many white folks, then I think we're not there yet. And so there's a lot of questions around justice. What is justice? How do we pursue justice? How do we make change? But justice to me has to be both backward and forward looking. We have to make amends for what we've stolen. I think about particularly the community of Brooklyn and urban removal. I don't know if you can call it renewal anymore, or the policies of urban removal and the dismantling and destruction of an entire neighborhood, an incredible neighborhood, and what the financial ramifications of that, the wealth that was lost from that. And so I just think there's a lot to be restored there. That's just one neighborhood. That's just one story in Charlotte. And I think if we just think that we're going to be able to, just kind of focus on the future, and I think we'll end up replicating the past again. We have to go back and really deal with what has happened in the past, make restitution for what has been defrauded and taken and stolen, and then we can all move forward in a more equitable way.
I'm going to get to some of the questions in the chat. One question is around, you mentioned your daughter, who is a Black child, a Black girl. What motivated you to adopt a Black child?
Yeah, interesting. I didn't, at the time, my wife and I could not have children biologically. And so we worked through an agency called Jewish Family Services when we got to the point where we felt like we wanted to adopt. And we talk about the racial issues here. We were asked on a questionnaire, what kind of children are you open to? And some of the questions there were about race and ability, disability, ability. And, we just said, we're open to whatever child, And so the way the process worked is that a birth mother, a mother who had made a decision that she wanted to give her child up for adoption, picked us out, chose us. And then she and her family interviewed us, which was a very intimidating process, as you can imagine, and then made the decision to adopt her child over to us. So we were there in the hospital, which was with her and her family as she was going through that process. It was very, very eye-opening and challenging, and it's a responsibility I don't take lightly. It's one that I entered into and have thought a lot about. It's shaped my ministry. It's shaped my life and my work, and it really is where my education began, because she was born in 2010. And her entire life has been lived within the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's really been trying to figure out what it means to raise a Black daughter as a white father in the Black Lives Matter America, and pastor predominantly white churches that have often tried to talk about race, these progressive ones, and not really made a lot of progress. That's where the project came from. It was the dialectic or the interaction of those two parts of my identity coming up with clashing with one another and mutually informing each other that led me to develop this project for white people to begin to look at their whiteness. Because, for instance, I'll tell one story about that I think really crystallizes this. So after Michael Brown was murdered and the movement in Ferguson began, that Sunday after the murder, I got up to preach. This is not in Myers Park, but it's a church I came from in Cary, North Carolina, also a very white, wealthy church there. And I got up and I preached, and I just said, confessionally, I just don't know what it means to raise a Black daughter in America now, after what I saw in Ferguson. I just don't, I was just confessionally saying, I just don't even know what it means anymore to do that. So I get out, you finish your sermon as any pastor does, and they go to the back door and you're shaking hands with folks as they come through. And an older white woman comes up to me and she says, I heard what you said about your daughter today in your sermon, and I just want to tell you, just tell her to obey the law and she'll be fine. And I just was so incensed by that. And to me, it just brought, now my daughter was 3 at the time, right? So this is ridiculous. And I just thought at that moment how much the white church had failed. It had failed. It was failing not only my own daughter, but it had failed me my entire life growing up by not educating me to understand that this question of whiteness had completely and totally corrupted my faith and the faith that was handed down to me.
And clearly the simplicity with which white people view the world, and as you said, kind of conflate being white with being human, being a good citizen. So it's just a natural way of being. Conversations that I've had with others, they are truly just bewildered by, what are you talking about? That it's different for you because of some of the attributes I happen to have in terms of having an advantage of having a degree or being able to get into, some meetings or conversations it's striking. Other question from the chat, a request. You mentioned very candidly, white people steal. So someone asked you to sort of speak more to that.
It's interesting because growing up, I think most of my life I was told that racism was people hating other people, that it was about hatred, and I even great Dr. King quotes about, hatred and things like that didn't really help me as a white person to understand racism and what it truly was and is. I think now, after a lot of reading from folks like Baldwin and others, I've come to realize that race, when I boil it down, race is a lie that was used to steal and hurt people. And I think that's the simplest definition. It's not about hatred so much as it is a lie that is used to protect economic interest and power, political power of white people as the dominant culture and the dominant group in society. I think about, given our conversation, I think about how whiteness was born. Where did it come from? Part of my investigation and part of the work we do is to try to go back and see that. And you can see very clearly when you look at the history that white, wealthy, landowning men who could vote created this idea of whiteness, not necessarily to protect themselves from the enslaved, who they already had power over, but to protect themselves from poor white people who they were worried, and had actually happened in some rebellions, were worried might join with the enslaved in a revolution, right? And so when you don't have a police force, by the way, back then, or a government, or any mode to protect your property and land and power, you can create a lie that functions just as powerfully as a police force does, or as powerfully as a law, or as powerfully as a government. And that is the way whiteness functioned, which is why whiteness still, even though it obviously impacts Black and brown people more than it impacts anybody else, it also impacts poor white people in such negative ways.
So it's about power. And I think in some instances it's power and hate, and it's a lot. The events on January 6th were horrible to witness. It was also sort of surreal just in terms of the contrast and the response and how that was Nobody was prepared because it was going to be white people out there primarily. So nobody thought to call police or have National Guard, because that's not what white folks do. White folks have heated conversations. They don't protest, they don't riot. And we saw that obviously that's not the case. It was not the case. I have another comment in the chat about what we've sort of referenced in terms of our love for Baldwin. I've referenced to what he talked about then is still very relevant today. You've referenced that you've quoted him a number of times yourself. We had a question from Lauren who says, what gives you hope that we will ever abolish whiteness?
Wow. Baldwin struggles with the question of hope a lot. Eddie Glaude's new book about Baldwin, I think, really brings this to light. The book Begin Again, how Baldwin holds on to hope. He says at some point that there's always hope because people always have the choice of whether to abdicate responsibility or to take on responsibility. And I think that is the choice every day for white people. And I think the question also goes to how far and how much responsibility are we willing to take? First, we have to take responsibility for our whiteness and our participation in an unjust system of oppression. That is our responsibility as human beings, and certainly as people of faith, if we have faith and of good conscience. But there's also, I think we also need to go further and take responsibility for abolishing and removing and dismantling the systems and the mechanisms that keep in place white power and dominance. So for instance, I'm not even sure you could call it capitalism anymore, but what the economic system we're currently in, whatever it is, late savage capitalism of some kind. Also the carceral system, the criminal justice system, and which is of course tied to so many other things, education, healthcare, wellness, so many other things. I think we have to start with looking at the systems and begin to do the hard work of dismantling and abolishing systems that keep in place this kind of dominant power.
So we have a question about if you've read White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity by Robert P. Jones.
Yes,
it's a great resource. And then we have another question about, sort of a follow-up to that. You would share some of your lessons learned from that work.
So Robbie Jones, I've met him a couple times and the book is great. I think it's barely scratching the surface of how deeply entangled whiteness is with Christianity in America. Someone recently said that we don't have Christianity in America, we have white folk religion. And that is what we have. It doesn't look anything like Christianity. I mean, the kind of rallies around January 6th and the activities there, and the what white American evangelicalism has come to be, has nothing to do with Jesus at all. They're completely divorced from one another. It's like what Frederick Douglass says about the Christianity of this nation, and how it has nothing to do with Jesus. I think is truer, maybe even truer today than it was in Douglass's time. I think white people who think of themselves as Christian or find themselves in predominantly white Christian institutions are going to have to interrogate every theological belief that they've ever been handed on. I think about something as simple as salvation, like the core idea of conversion. And if anybody has been watching the PBS documentary right now about the Black Church with Henry Louis Gates Jr., the early question that the Anglicans are asking about whether or not the enslaved should be allowed to be participants in the church is a crucial question when it comes to white theologies of salvation. Because what becomes possible is an idea of salvation divorced from the material reality of the world as it is constituted, meaning you can become converted and still maintain the system of slavery. You can be converted and not therefore then demand your freedom as a part of it. So you get this sort of otherworldly idea of salvation completely divorced from the material reality of the political and the economic and system at the time, which is how part of how white people are trying to justify their practice, this horrific practice of enslavement. And so the Christianity, that I don't even know if I can call it that Christianity, that religion of whatever that was, is not the religion of Jesus. Because Jesus's understanding of salvation was also liberative. It was a liberative, good news to the poor, freedom for the captives, release for those in prison, debt jubilee. I mean, the amount of material, Jesus talked about money more than he did anything else. So the amount of material reality that Jesus wants to deal with, and we created a very idea of salvation as the core of American religion that is divorced from reality. That to me means that every part of our tradition has to be interrogated.
You know, I think what is striking me in this conversation at this moment is that the person who asked about hope, I was trying to find who asked the question. I actually don't have hope that whiteness will go away. Because it's taught the same way we're having this conversation with intentionality. There's someone else who's not having this conversation, and or they're having a different kind of conversation with intentionality. I mean, we had 70 million people or so vote for Donald Trump and the espoused ideology that he used in rallies and speeches, and people, some have said he radicalized a portion of America, but that just to me just says, wow, there's still, after everything that happened this summer, after George Floyd, after Breonna Taylor, we've already had Andre Hill. You know, we had a 9-year-old who was tased in New York. So I don't know that I have hope. I am encouraged by these kind of conversations. I'm encouraged by the degree to which you are interrogating your whiteness. And again, the degree to which you have to own your whiteness, because then it helps you understand my Blackness. Like, those two things have to happen in tandem. I'm curious, what are you sort of the only person in your family, in your house, that's having this epiphanous moment? What would Thanksgiving have been like for you if you were around the table? Is everyone in your house on the same page?
Well, my family are educators. My mom taught at UNC Charlotte, my father at Central Piedmont Community College. But, my family is a divided household. My father is Republican, my mother is Democrat. And so, we have pretty robust conversations on a regular basis. I'm having these conversations at home. I'm also having them around dinner tables, not just with my own family, but 1,000 families that are part of our church. And their dinner tables also often look like mine, where maybe the wife is one particular political party and the husband is another, and they're trying to sort out those things together. And so we have these conversations openly. And I think, I don't know that we can abolish whiteness. I don't even know what that would look like. What I have said, or what I've tried to think through, is that I think of whiteness sort of like an addiction, like a disease. And it's sort of the kind of thing that I can be in recovery for, like alcoholism, for instance, or I can not be in recovery, like I'm sort of off the wagon with my whiteness. And most Americans, of course, are not in recovery of any kind. They're not even trying to be in some kind of recovery for their whiteness, because they don't see whiteness as evil. They don't see it as a lie and a mythology that they have traded in this grand bargain of their humanity for participation in a system that's oppressing their neighbors. So I see it as sort of like this disease, this addiction that we have grown as white people to become so accustomed to that we don't know how to escape. So the only thing we can do is go to recovery for it. And the part of the groups that I've created are they're sort of like that. There are other people who are addicted to whiteness coming together and saying, you know, hi, my name is Ben, and I'm addicted to this evil thing that's harming me and people around me. And I need to work on this, and I got to stay in recovery. And so the work never ends. So once you get into it, the work never ends. Or it's like someone who goes off the wagon again and has to go back to, loses their chip and has to go back to AA for the very first time and tell the story. And I think also it's all about telling stories. One of the things that happens in the group that I think is so powerful is we require white folks to confess the ways of whiteness in their life, to talk about and tell stories of the ways they failed. And that can be, it's very powerful. It's a very emotional experience, but it's also a very powerful experience. And to continue to do that, to show up and do that over and over again, I think this is the kind of thing that I'll be doing for the rest of my life.
Okay, we got a lot of questions in Q&A that we need to get to, but I don't know how much time you have, but the questions are piling up, and as long as you're willing to stay, that's fine. But we had the schedule for an hour, and we got a lot of people that's trying to get in here with some questions. And while she's looking at those questions to ask them, I got one. You can't be the most popular person in the white community, so tell us what kind of kickbacks you're getting back for your positioning on all of this.
Well, we have the only Black Lives Matter sign in front of a church in Myers Park that I know of so far. I hope there will be more at some point. And every day we get letters, calls. We call them, we have different folders for them now. Some people call them hate mail. Some people call it trolls. One of my associates preached an entire sermon about the hate mail that she has received as being a part of this community. We have like a real estate agent. I've thought even about calling the real estate agent board on this particular gentleman, but who calls every time he drives by about how angry he is when he sees the sign. And he doesn't even go to the church. He doesn't live in Myers Park. He's just driving through. He's so mad he can't even drive by the sign that says Black Lives Matter. That's how deeply entrenched his animosity is. And then, we get the kind of letters we get are about how could we support Black Lives Matter? Don't you know they're a Marxist organization that is dedicated to the destruction of the nuclear family? That is the same line we hear every single time. And, we don't have time to call back every troll, every hater that drives by and tell them that we see Black Lives Matter as a rehumanizing movement, as a movement dedicated to the rehumanization and that why wouldn't we want to be a participant in any movement that would reclaim the humanity of those who have been dehumanized by white society? That sounds like something that Jesus would be a part of, since Jesus was constantly a part of rehumanizing those that the systems and codes in his day had tried to dehumanize, whether that because they were sick or Samaritan or whatever it was. So we see it as a faith approach, but Gerald, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of other religious folk in Myers Park don't like it.
So Gerald, I will apologize to the audience. I am not getting questions from Facebook, so you'll have to pose some of the questions that are there.
This is actually Zoom Q&A, not Facebook.
I am only getting questions from the chat, so let me see if I can get to the Q&A. Okay, got it. All right, so we are rapidly approaching that hour, so I will just go ahead and say, Dr. Boswell, Reverend Boswell, we will need you to come back to have another conversation with us.
Before you finish that statement, let me say this as how important that is. We had over roughly 400 people that had registered for this event, and for some reason, Zoom cut it off shortly after 100. And so I think I had to leave because my phone was ringing off the hook about people that couldn't get in. So we have to bring you back in the very near future because a lot of people were interested in this conversation and they couldn't get in, and finally got Zoom to fix that problem, but they've already gone now, so they didn't come back in. So go ahead, Tiffany, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to try to get to some of these questions. Let's see.
And Gerald and Tiffany,
Well,
I'll hang on as long as Tiffany will hang on. How about that?
okay, good deal. So it said, one question is, do white people think Black Lives Matter is a militant organization that is plotting to commit violence towards them? If so, what so-called past militant group are they comparing Black Lives Matter to?
Yeah, I think white people do believe that. But I think they will happily find any organization that they can scapegoat to continue to remain in denial about their participation in forms of oppression. So if that be Antifa or Antifa, whatever it is, they'll blame anybody that they can blame to not have to look at themselves. I just think that it's startling, even to me as a person who's white, it's still startling how white people, how deeply committed to living in denial about this white people are. And I think that goes to the fact that we know if we really see this, if we really understand the history and learn what it is, two things I think are there. One is we're going to be afraid we're going to have to pay back, right? Monetarily. The other is we're always afraid that Black, brown, and indigenous folks will do to us what we did to them, right? Those are the two fears. Those are the two greatest fears. And I think we got to stop being afraid. Got to stop being afraid.
Yes, I saw a meme probably during in the wake of George Floyd's death, where someone tweeted, "Be glad we're seeking justice and not revenge." So there's that thought, if you will, as well. Another question is, how do you define your culture as a Caucasian? Do you believe that there's a correlation between the ideology of white advantage and a lack of cultural acceptance among Caucasians?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a culture. Baldwin says white people don't have a culture. There's no white community. And I believe that's true. Of course, when I came to figure that out, it was something of a crisis. See, I mean, I went looking, I have to admit here, I went looking for some way to redeem whiteness. I mean, I'm a pastor, a religious person. I think everything can be redeemed, and I was really hoping to figure out how to redeem myself. Right. Of course, that's a ridiculous attempt, but I'm trying to redeem myself, redeem my history, my ancestors, our lineage. So first, I thought, well, maybe it's that we're European, and or maybe it's that I'm Irish. If I could just get back into my indigenous Irish Celtic heritage, somehow that's gonna, that's who I really am. Or if I could really understand my Norwegian-ness or my Englishness. But see, whiteness is not an ethnicity, right? It's not an ethnicity. It's a lie, right? It's an ideology. And therefore it's evil. There's nothing redeemable about it. There's nothing in it that can be redeemed. Now, it doesn't mean white people who are racialized as white can't be redeemed, but the redemption for them begins with taking responsibility for the fact that they have been participants in an evil system. And they have to, that's the starting point. And then to recover their humanity, which has been dehumanized, right? To the point where they would either vote like we talked about the rich person and saying it's just an economic thing, or like the poor person who says, well, at least I'm better than my Black neighbor. That's a dehumanized voting process. That is an act of someone who has been dehumanized. I mean, there are some Black scholars who I've read who think white people are still suffering from their own trauma and that they are now traumatizing others from a trauma they experienced generationally, whether that be in Europe or wherever, go back to the Pilgrims and Puritans trying to escape religious persecution. But that trauma that we've experienced doesn't justify the institution of whiteness.
There's a question about, so there is a question in here, one of the questions from Mike around one most important action a white person can do that will further the cause of equality. and that's directed at me, but I'm going to share the question with you, Reverend Boswell. I don't know the answer to that, Mike. And hey, Mike, I know who you are, Mike Whitehead. I don't know if there is an action that white people need to take right now more than sort of dismantling whiteness and understanding what it means to be white and the advantage or the privilege or the power that just being white holds. Because if not, then I think it becomes more of, again, this performative allyship. It is the marches during the summer. It is, the protests, the riots in Charlotte when something happens. But there are injustices and inequity and oppression happening all the time. And it's in those quote unquote small, non-publicized acts of oppression where I need white people to act. I need white people to be thinking about me when they're sitting around a table or sitting on Zoom tomorrow and they see no people of color in their spaces and places. They see no people of color, they see no Black people in their spaces and places. I need white people to be bold enough to ask questions and to be curious and to reckon with being white, and that what would you say to that question, Reverend Boswell?
Well, I would echo absolutely everything that you said. I think that's the reason, one of the reasons that I started the process that I did is because I asked that same question and people of color told me exactly what you said, go do your work. And of course I was like, well, what is my work? And they're like, go figure out what it means to be white, go figure out how you became white, what it is to be white. Go understand the lie you're living in, Baldwin would say. And because we can't understand the lie we're living in, we don't understand America, Baldwin says. We don't understand the country we're living in. We don't understand our churches. We don't understand our neighborhoods and why they are the way they are. And we don't understand ourselves. I mean, this is the thing that is so humbling and almost embarrassing. I mean, probably is embarrassing. And that is like James Weldon Johnson, incredible scholar, once said that Black people know white people better than they know themselves. And of course, that was because Black people needed to know them for the sake of their survival. And yet that still is true, that Black people know white people better than we know ourselves. How embarrassing is it, right, for me to open a book written by a Black author, and they can write on a page what sounds like a therapist who would only know me writing on a page. And I can read it, and it sounds more true than any therapist has ever said to me, any family member, any lover or spouse I've ever had who would know me, my own family, my mother. That is humbling, really, really humbling, to have the mirror put up before you by W.E.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, so many others, that shows you who you really are. That, if we can't do that and then not turn away, right? Don't turn away. Just keep looking at what you see there. There's nowhere we can go if we don't do that. That's where we have to start. And then we might understand, for instance, why, when we show up at a protest, we might be treated a particular way, or where we should be in the protest, or what our relationship to police should be, or what we should do on Nextdoor, for instance. I've just been stunned recently by a person who went through my process about her own experience of trying to be an anti-racist presence on Nextdoor, the app for her neighborhood, right? Get on Nextdoor and tell your neighbors to stop calling the police on their neighbors, especially the Black neighbors who are walking through on the streets. Tell your neighbors to stop being violent on Nextdoor. That you can start right there in your own home.
There are actions that I think white people can take that truly, particularly now, 6 feet away. Like, what conversations are you having in your house, in your home, with your children, with your relatives? Oftentimes when we've been in these spaces in person, we'd have these conversations, and inevitably that would be the question, like, what do we do next? What do I want to do? And I think some of the most uncomfortable conversations are going to be with people who are the closest to you. So in terms of actions that white people can begin to take, it is definitely about, when I reference understanding and unpacking being white, I also am open to, and this is not always the case, but I'm open to white people asking me questions. It needs to be done in a certain way. And what I mean by that, not exploitative, sort of voyeuristic. Well, what is it like to be Black, Tiffany? But if someone is really sincere and genuine and sort of owning, I'm a woman and you're a woman, yes, but a Black woman's experience and a white woman's experience are not the same. So I can have a conversation about sharing a line of difference that's gender specific. Racial, ethnic identity is a whole other set of variables that the intersectionality with which makes walking in this world a little bit different. I want to be respectful of your time, Reverend. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are at 8:06, and I want to give you a moment to make some final remarks or pose some challenges, pose some questions of the audience, and then we will certainly have you with us again.
Thanks, Tiffany. I don't have a whole lot to say to finish up. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate the questions that were asked, your questions, Tiffany and Gerald also, and also from the folks who participated tonight. This is some hard stuff, and it's hard to have these conversations, but they're so important. And I'm really just, it's been an honor to be here with you all. If folks want to find out a little bit more about the process that I created, What Does It Mean to Be White, and go to our church website, myersparkbaptist.org. And when you go there, you'll find information about the What Does It Mean to Be White series. I also think, to your point, a lot of times, so one of the reasons I do white affinity groups, and of course we have accountability, a woman named Dr. Lucretia Berry, who runs an organization called Brownicity, and does diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, holds accountable all the facilitators who've been trained in my process and holds me accountable for our own whiteness as we go through the process. I would also encourage folks to find out a little bit more about the work of Brownicity and Dr. Berry and what she's doing. She and I have been partnering together and in this work of trying to help white people look at their whiteness. And I'm grateful for her ability to do that as a Black woman. And so obviously supporting her work. And I'll just say, all the stuff that needs to ever have been written for white people has already been written. We don't have to, ask really weird questions, Tiffany, of you or others, because people of color have already written everything white people will ever need to know, right now. And we just we haven't taken the responsibility to read it, to trust it, to believe it, and then to live differently based on what we have discovered there. So really honored to be a part of this conversation, to be entered into this space with you. So thank you for that. And I also just say, I would strongly encourage anyone who is on this call tonight to make a contribution to the Charlotte Post Foundation so that they can continue to have these incredible conversations.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate the journey that you are on. We appreciate you creating discomfort in your congregation and other spaces and places. Being comfortable will not get us to our next level of humanity, quite honestly. And so with that, Gerald, I'll turn it back over to you to thank our guests and to close us out for this evening.
Well, Reverend Boswell, I can't thank you enough for coming in and being open and honest about all of this and just enlightening all of us in terms of how this whole conversation is going. And again, we will have you back pretty soon because we lost a couple hundred people who I'm still getting nasty notes for. So we will bring you back. And I will promise them that they will get in this time, because I'm not sure what happened that they didn't get in this time, but we did get that fixed. I want to thank all of the people that attended and we were able to get in for all of your comments. And I want to thank the team again for everything they've done. Tiffany, great job. Linda and Nichelle, great job. Natalie, you want a final word before we close this out? I guess not. Okay.
Gerald, I have a question.
Okay.
Maybe we can find a way to have these questions answered that weren't answered and maybe post them or something, or figure out a way to get the answers to the attendees.
And save the chat, Michelle, or Linda, you can save the chat. You can get the questions from the chat. And from Q&A, I'm not exactly sure we save the questions from Q&A. We can
Right.
definitely save the questions from chat.
And maybe we can post them or somehow.
Sure, maybe we can even send it to them because we have their emails registered other than the ones that has shared their emails. But there's so many unanswered questions. We can go for long at the time for it.
You know, and Reverend Boswell spare time.
Yeah.
Maybe he can answer all the questions.
Well, with that being said, we will look at doing that and taking care of that. But for now, I want to thank all of you for coming out, and be blessed and be safe in your journeys. Thank you all. We appreciate you.
Thank you. You can stay on a moment. Let's see.
Do we want to stay on a moment?
The panelists.
No.
We still have people leaving.
Mhm.
We
You gonna stop the recording?
you know you all have control of this stuff.
Yeah, Joe, you can stop Facebook Live.